Welcome back. So you will remember this prescription from the previous lecture. And I want to move from talking about the relationship between employment and poverty to talking about education and poverty. Now, the first thing to note is that a college degree is still something only held by a minority of Americans. So if you are in an MSW program, you're already among the educated elite. And if you successfully complete the program, you will be among the most educated Americans in the top 10 or 11% or so. People tend to overestimate how common college completion is. So don't let your own experience and the experience of your friends and coworkers give you a distorted view of reality. You're very much in the minority. Now, that said, it is absolutely true that there is a correlation between education and employment. The more education you have, as this shows, the more likely you are to be employed, and the less education you have, the less likely you are to have a job. Better educated Americans earn more, too, and this has always been the case. But notice what happens here in the 1980s. While college-educated people have always earned more, their earnings have more recently continued to grow while most others have stagnated. And for the least educated people, their wages have even declined. This is now looking at it for more recent years, looking at the correlation between education, unemployment, and earnings. Same pattern. Now, as you would expect, given the data on employment and income, less educated people are much more likely to be poor. Poverty rate in 2010, which is what you see here, for people with less than a high school diploma was 34%, while the official poverty rate for people who graduated college was 4%. 30 percentage point difference. Given the fact that most people who are making policy in the United States have a college degree, what might this tell us about how they think about those policies and people in need? I think that's a piece of our puzzle. Still, what these data show are that the people I talked about earlier are right. You are much less likely to be poor if you stay in school, graduate high school, go on to college, and graduate college. So why don't people just do that? Would that solve poverty? Well, first problem is that, as many of you know, the quality of public schools in the United States varies wildly. So lots of children, by mere accident of their birth, will wind up less prepared, less competitive, or entirely unprepared for college, depending on the quality of their local schools. Some of this has to do with the way that we fund schools through local property taxes. And that means that poor places often have less money available for their schools, though it means those schools have fewer resources available to educate their students. And schools in poor neighborhoods do indeed consistently fare much worse. So this shows reading and math scores for 9-year-olds and shows us that students in schools in low poverty areas do much better than students in schools in high poverty areas. Part of what's happening here is within the schools themselves, right? In high poverty districts, teachers have less training, they have less education, they have less experience, and principals also tend to be less educated and less experienced. Now, some of what's accounting for these differences is happening outside the school, too. Not only may students in poor districts suffer cognitive impairment due to poor nutrition, they may go to school hungry and be less able to concentrate. But above and beyond that, parents in high-income districts, even if they're not sending their children off to expensive private schools, supplement their children's education out of their own pockets. Now, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it's another way that we confer advantage upon advantage to children from upper income families and pile disadvantage upon disadvantage upon children unlucky enough to have been born to parents living in poor neighborhoods. And in one phrase, here's the dilemma we must confront if we want to increase access to higher education among poor and low-income people. So, students from upper-income households do better on the tests that select for access to higher education. And once enrolled, they're more likely to finish. The students from the richest families with the lowest test scores actually completed college more often than students from the lowest income households with the highest test scores. All of those factors and more help explain why higher education in the United States is still overwhelmingly the province of upper income Americans and a system of reproducing privilege. Finally, there are plenty of students from low-income backgrounds who are nonetheless more than prepared to get into college and succeed there, but many simply can't for reasons revealed in this survey. The very fact that they come from poor families increases the chances that college is a luxury they cannot afford. Once they're able, they need to be working to contribute to their household's income. And even what we might think of as inexpensive or moderately priced institutions would be well out of reach. I mean, think of a family of four living just above the poverty line with a gross income of $25,000 a year. Right? $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 a semester might seem modest to some, but it would be inconceivable to many others. And while loans or scholarships and other aid might be available, it's easy, I think, for us to take for granted the knowledge of such things, or that you're going to have help navigating that complexity. And all that having been said, of course, education is no guarantee. So, here's one summary of the research literature on why people are poor, and we'll turn to the family structure issues down the road. But for now, note how many of these are forces largely outside of individual control. Yes, there are people whose bad behavior in decision-making is a factor, but those behaviors and decisions are made in very constrained circumstances. That's not why most people are poor anyway. It's jobs, it's wages, it's mobility, it's childcare, it's health, it's disability, it's access to education that explain most of the need in the United States. And yet, we are nonetheless still more likely than people in other countries to be ignorant of this and to blame people for their poverty.